Hello there, you're about to watch the extended version of my interview with Jonathan Holmes from Road Rules, part of my larger video about Pedro Zamora and the real world. For more of that video and for other interviews with folks involved in the production, check the links in the description. Now, on with the interview with Jonathan. So I would love to start by just having you introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Jonathan Holmes. I am a former cast member on Road Rule Season 5, The Northern Trail. And since then, I have done more things in both the social work space and also video games, writing about them and making videos about them, sometimes even participating in making them now and again. So that's me.
So when the real world ran in the early 90s, what do you remember from that? What were your thoughts specifically about Pedro when that was on TV?
When the real world first started, and I was a big part of the MTV generation, I think they're calling us now, and MTV was a cutting edge, weird, surreal even channel. It played music, but all of its original programming was stuff like Liquid Television, and there was a game show called Remote Control that had like the big gross like stuff sticking out of the walls, and then Adam Sandler would come on. So MTV in general wasn't what people probably think of it today, which is just the challenge and a mean show called Ridiculousness, where just bad things happen and a skateboarder laughs at them, I guess. I think I've seen it. So at the time, it was tons of diverse, original, cutting edge, pushing boundaries programming. And then the real world started as part of that. And I was totally into it. I couldn't believe that they just let real people be themselves. And the first season, there was like two black people talking to white people about race issues. And I was like, I saw some of that on like All in the Family in the 70s, but generally speaking, 80s and 90s TV got a lot safer. And this was stuff that I could really relate to and made me feel optimistic about TV getting less fake. And that was really blown up when Pedro and Puck on season 3 were kind of the two sides of the pushing the boundaries coin. On one hand, you had Puck, who was just awful. And I don't think we would have Jackass, and I don't think Johnny Knoxville would have a career today if it weren't for Puck just showing up and being gross and troubling and entertaining. Like I thought Puck was super cool because he didn't care what anybody thought of him. And I looked up to him in a sense as a rebellious teenager. And even more so, I looked up to Pedro because he not only pushed the boundaries of what someone would do on TV. An openly gay man with HIV was completely unheard of. We were coming out still of the 80s where the Ronald Reagan, as I recall, as a child, didn't acknowledge that HIV even existed. And it was just something that was permitted to happen to a population that wasn't at all valued. And not only did Pedro value himself and have the confidence to like show himself in an extremely homophobic time, but he was incredibly relatable and human, and other people on the cast with him really accepted him and loved him. So not only was he a role model, but many members of the cast were role models too, to show people like myself how to not be homophobic, how to be an ally. All I had in my high school was other homophobic guys, and there was pressure on me to prove how straight I was and how alpha I was and masculine I was all the time. And I failed utterly at most of those challenges, and it made me feel like there was something wrong with me. And there is Pedro saying, I don't care if you think there's something wrong with me. I'm going to live my life. And showing what it was like to have this incredibly scary virus that everyone was terrified of at the time, and say, I am not afraid of you being afraid of me. I know that my life has value and I want to show it to you was all just huge.
Do you remember what did you know about HIV at that time?
At the time, I knew that HIV was transmitted through blood, and I knew people said, oh, you don't have to worry about getting it from someone coughing on you or somebody like splashing saliva on you or kissing or whatnot. But I was still terrified of that idea. And the way that HIV and homophobia kind of paired up in teenager culture was really painful and really hard to fight against in your own head, kind of alone playing with it as a young person growing up. So I was told I didn't have to be afraid of people that had HIV, but I still was. And I still think about regularly in the morning, sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth, an episode of The Real World where they prominently showed Pedro is having sex and it's good. Like they could have just had the letters on the screen flash. It's sex and it's good. He's got HIV and it's okay. Where him and his boyfriend were like rolling around in bed, and the other roommates were like, "Whoa!" And they were playing, I believe, song by the band James, where the man is singing, just keeps saying, "The bed is on fire with passion and love," and I'm like, they're the creators of this show, not only Pedro, but the creators of the show at MTV are saying like, we endorse this, no longer fear this. This is love and it is acceptable. And it's not only acceptable, but it's something to put on a pedestal and say, like, it's amazing that these people are showing you this despite we all know the rest of the world or large parts of the rest of the world are against them. So it was a massive cultural moment.
So I was going to ask, like, if Pedro's mission for getting on the show, he talked about how he wanted to show viewers a portrait of a queer man's life living with HIV and all the dimensions of that. I was going to ask if, was that successful in your case? Like, did you learn about HIV and learn about his life from that appearance? It sounds like you did.
Yeah, I learned about him and I learned about how I should be with people in general. And I learned to be less homophobic, certainly. I think that I am lucky that I didn't have like a lot of homophobia deeply ingrained in my family. My family often like encouraged me to be more gay, and my mom was like, "I know you're gay, so just be more gay." I'm like, "Mom, I'd be gay if I felt like it, but I don't feel like it right now." She's like, "Just think about it." So for whatever reason, my mom was very anti-homophobic and anti-racist and very encouraging. Um, but as for me, I would say that learning about Pedro as an individual was more of a jumping off point to learn more about HIV and learn more about Pedro, which I did through an amazing comic by his cast member on Real World Season 3, Judd Wittick, made a comic, I believe, called My Friend Pedro. I have to look back. I haven't read it in a couple of years. Pedro and me! Oh, it's been so long. Yeah, I bought it back when I think the cover was still black and white at a bookstore in Boston all these years ago. So, yeah, it was monumental to both see Pedro's life, see how Judd embraced Pedro, and then told stories about his experience with Pedro through comics. I went on to draw comics myself for a bit, and also just understand that there's more to being gay, more to being someone with HIV than just what you see on TV. And there's a reality there that we got a glimpse of through Pedro. But if you wanted to know more, you'd have to keep digging. And I ended up doing so. I ended up at the time learning, I think, more than a lot of my friends or a lot of my family did about HIV and gay culture as it was at the time, and how we may not have had an HIV epidemic if it weren't for the fact for deeply ingrained homophobia, from what I've gathered and what I've learned. It was a lot to learn about, and there's still much to learn.
Let's jump over to the road rules.
Oh, sure.
Why did you want to be on road rules?
So I actually first applied to be on The Real World in Boston because I wanted to be famous and I thought it would be fun and I wouldn't have to go far and I was going to be going to college in Boston. So it just seemed like something to try out for without trying too hard. And I feel badly sometimes for Buna Murray Productions because I think part of the reason they ended up picking me for Road Rules is because it seemed like I wasn't someone who was going to try too hard. And then when I was actually on the show, I was trying incredibly hard to make my friends laugh, like five people. And I didn't think about mainstream audiences whatsoever. But I wouldn't have had the guts to do that, I don't think. And I wouldn't have applied for the show at all if it weren't for folks, again, like Pedro, but also like Puck, who was just social mores rebel in general and then ended up getting kicked off the show. So I thought, if I'm terrible, they'll just kick me off. That's fine. I don't have to be a perfect person. And weirdly enough, Pedro almost seemed too perfect in a way to even look up to. Like he was so brave and so handsome and so kind and like so quotes normal, other than the fact that, of course, he was gay in the 90s and had HIV, which most people were not willing to come out and say. But one of the things that's really powerful about Pedro as an icon is how he pushed against, without even meaning to, just by being himself, pushed against all the negative stereotyping and stereotyping in general of gay characters on TV at the time. Like there would, as you know better than most, Matt, there would often be one gay character who wouldn't come out and say they're gay, but there would be jokes because it was safer to make it just a joke in some way about some aspect of not being straight. And they were almost always white in my recollection anyway, to be like a minority and gay and normal and handsome and nice. Like it was totally unheard of at the time. And it was real. Like what was so wonderful, I could write about this for a while, as you could tell. What was so wonderful about it was just by showing up and being himself, Pedro showed all of the negative stereotypes and all of the cartoonish stereotypes we'd seen about gay men in particular were fake. And the reality is, gay men are normal people that just show up and live their lives like anybody else. So I couldn't relate with that well because I both was blatantly abnormal as a teenager and also like deeply related with Pedro's rejection of attempts to like fit into what a normal guy is supposed to be while still being normal. That's the part I can relate with. Puck, I could relate with how he just like actively gave a FU to the status quo of what a guy is supposed to be. I actually met him in a bathroom at the MTV Music Awards in I think it was the year 2000. And any sort of concept I had of him being someone who was just like going for it without worrying about what people thought was totally shattered because he was constantly talking, even in the bathroom, about like, am I pucking it up enough? Am I really pucking? Are people going to see me puck? Like I got to puck out, and just all about trying to get as much attention on himself as possible. And I just kind of walked alongside him, thinking. Now I know what the real puck is like, and that was something. Of course, would have much rather have gotten to meet Pedro, but that's not the way things turned out.
Yeah, you mentioned that one of your reasons for wanting to get on one of the shows was you're like, oh, this is a way to get famous.
Mhm.
That's certainly something that people gradually became aware of as the seasons went on. It seems like you were applying at a point when people had realized, okay, I can go in with a mission. I can have a goal for what I want to
Right.
do with this appearance.
Yeah, that's right. It was a time when I didn't think I was going to be world famous. I didn't think I was going to be famous for more than a year or two. And I didn't make too much of an effort to parlay it into anything else because I thought, frankly, it was sort of uh, how do I put this? So if you at that time, if you got famous for being on reality TV, it was almost like being on the news for 15 minutes. And sure, people were going to see you, but then when the news is over, they're not going to see you. So for me, the idea that because I was in reality TV meant that I was somehow going to get a music career or an acting career or ever be back on reality TV again, because at that time they didn't have people back on. It was, a one and done. And now they've got the Real World Road Rules Challenge, which weirdly enough, I was a part of the first iteration of. The final episodes of my season of Road Rules, we competed against the Real World All Stars, which included Sean Duffy, who's now a budding member of the Trump administration, which is bizarre. Sean was very kind and very fun to hang around with at the time, and we were all in our 20s. And now I see what he's saying, and I think about calling him up and be like, remember when you taught me how to be a lumberjack? Well, Sean, back then you were great. And these days, just as someone who cares about you, I have concerns. Maybe you can keep pretending to be the way you are in order to get in the Trump administration, but can you secretly be good after you're in there and kind of like subvert some stuff? Just my personal politics chiming in there. Can't help but be concerned about some things, especially when it comes to how queer people are going to be treated in the upcoming administration. It's been painful for me to see that that side of reality TV, the more conservative, and I think that's being polite. It's often just straight up bigoted and regressive. That side of reality TV is somehow becoming like our most popular politicians. It's been strange to see.
When you were on, did you have any awareness of the camera being there? And like, did that change the way that you were presenting yourself? Did it make you self-conscious? How much did you think about like what you were doing and how it would be received?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that when the camera's going and it was going as soon as we woke up, they'd like shake us awake. And then there's just a big camera. Back then, they were like on the person's shoulder with a boom mic and somebody with the boom mic controls in the background. So it was like three people usually just filming you. You couldn't help but be aware of it. And the first couple of weeks, self-conscious or confused, and I would occasionally make like intentional decisions that I thought, oh, I hope they like take that and edit it in because I personally would think that was funny. So I'd like script a little line in my head or something and spit it out. They almost never used any of that. And for with the show I was on, it was a week's worth of filming. A lot of it was like action because some of the producers of Road Rules, is my understanding, also worked on American Gladiators, which is kind of why and Road Rules as a concept ended up having more life than the real world in some ways, because Road Rules then morphed into the challenge, which I think is on season 40. And it's just become ultra masculine, mean, competitive stuff. I'm trying to be polite. I would go back on it. Don't get me wrong. It would be fun to show up and compete and come up with some lines in my head that I think will be funny if they edit them in and then lose and then go home. I'm not like morally opposed to it, but the challenge is a completely different kind of show than Real World and Road Rules were. Real World and Road Rules was John Murray and Mary Ellis Bunham. John Murray was a documentarian. Mary Ellis Bunham was a soap opera producer. They got together and tried to like get the best of both worlds. Mary Ellis knew how to like engage with drama. John Murray knew how to like engage with reality and put them together, and you have a show that hopefully means something. And now it's just turned into American Gladiators, except they're mean to each other in between competitions and like scheme against each other and whatnot. It's just the core of the challenge is often just really selfish, awful stuff, with like some moments of kindness and heroism put in there where people like will sacrifice for their friends and whatnot. But that's generally the outlying moments on those shows. So we would never have a Pedro today on the challenge. They wouldn't pick him to, fall off a log and try to like land on a target in water after jumping out of a plane and then like meanly backstabbing his friends in the back and voting them off the show. Like the era he was on and the era I wanted to be on these shows was when it was an era about like showing who you are and trying to engage empathetically with the world and hope the empathy comes back to you from the world and you're understood by it.
Did you have any opportunities to do that? Like, are there moments from your season that you feel particularly proud of that you're like, I did a good job?
Oh, you mean where I like came up with a line or something that was funny?
Or yeah, no, stuff that you look back on, you're like, all right, that I got on, I wanted to I wanted to impress
Sure.
people or whatever.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think that my intentional lines that occasionally got in, like I sang a little bit of Spinal Tap's Rock and Roll Creation while we were working with Third Eye Blind on making a uh, public service announcement about why teenagers shouldn't end their lives, which was just, it's so, I mean, what part of that sentence, first of all, made sense together? And second of all, like, was appropriate in any way? Like, just wholly inappropriate to take that on. And that was one of the things I loved about Road Rules in general is the producers of it were completely out of their minds, I think. We also did a mission in a emergency room where we went into see really dying people and I really drilled a metal pipe through a man's bone. And I still wonder was that fake somehow? Did they just hire a bunch of special effects artists and actors? Like, did they really let me do that? And logic dictates, Occam's razor and all that. Straight line is the best explanation. They probably just said, "Oh, I don't know. Yeah, just drill a metal pipe through a guy's bone. That's fine. Oh, that person's dying on camera that we don't even know. Do we have releases signed?" They just kind of went for it back then, and they would not do that today. I'm really grateful that I got that experience, and I now work in an emergency room professionally, in part because it was so gratifying to help people on that particular mission in Road Rules. So I'm pretty proud of that. The thing I'm most notorious for, I think, on for being on Road Rules, because I remember all of these things that I'm both embarrassed about. Like I had a crush on a girl, but she didn't really like me, but she liked me platonically enough, so it's not like she hated me. That didn't always reflect super well on me. I was sort of like, do you remember My So-Called Life by any chance? Do you remember the curly-haired friend who just liked Claire Danes so much, and he was sort of pathetic and also sympathetic, but also just sort of creepy?
Hmm.
I was like that for at least one episode of Road Rules, which w wasn't my favorite thing to see about myself, but I had to face the facts. That's how I came across to the editors anyway. One thing that people really remember, I think, and seem to hate about me to this day and make fun of me for even now. I was on a Road Rules fan podcast, I think last year, the Mike Lewis show. Really nice host, really fun experience. The comments were just, oh, that's that loser who wouldn't shower nude with his male friends. And I was like, well, that's not exactly how they worded it, I don't think. But I can't help but be puzzled to this day that if you break the kind of male morale, the male ethic that you're supposed to always be comfortable being naked with other men, it makes people think you're gay, which of course they think is bad if they're homophobic, and or it makes them think you are afraid of other men being attracted to you, which is not exactly it. But I do think that being nude with other men is an intimate thing, and I don't always want to be intimate with everybody. And you probably understand this better than me, Matt. I had bigger ideas on how to explain it at the time, but now I'm sweaty under the lights and mentally
I
confused.
think there's
But
some, what we're just talking about there is having some awareness of personal privacy, which is something that I think viewers of reality shows today are not accustomed to seeing on
mm,
castmates.
sure. But even then, like I didn't want to show my ass and my testicles and my penis on MTV. And you sign a release saying like we will get to show your ass in any way you want. And they actually released a VHS tape called The Real World You Never Saw that I have somewhere that shows like people's butts jumping into hot tubs and whatnot. So I was aware of that to some degree. But I also am just someone who like even today, there's all this hubbub about trans folks going into bathrooms. And it's like everyone should have the same genitalia in the bathroom together because that way we'll be safe and not feel weird. I'm like, I feel weird around guys' dicks sometimes because and vaginas. I don't know these people that well. When I get naked with people, man or woman, I'd like it to be because, we're not just meeting a need like pooping or taking a shower. Like it means something to me to be naked with people. And I meant that at the time on the show too. If they were like my best friends, Dan and Noah at the time, there's much more likely I would have been like, sure, well, I'll get intimate with you fellas. But at the time, I was like, these guys are kind of mean to me, and at least Noah was quite mean to me at that time. This was on an episode about being Canadian Mounties, and the whole episode is about he being just super mean to me and me not caring about being normal. And they like focused on me wearing my bathing suit in the public shower with these guys as like a key moment of my abnormality. So there's something about being a man. You're just supposed to be comfortable showering with other men, or else you're like a defective man. And I was defective and proud at the time, which I guess it ties in sort of to all the other stuff about me just wanting to show up and be myself because I was shown by other cast members of other shows that that was okay to do.
Well, let's talk about what followed the actual filming and the broadcast and all that. How did, at the time, viewers react to you on the show?
So after I was on Road Rules, it was interesting. I got some fan mail, and it was adorable because at the time, Buna Murray would print out the fan mail and snail mail it to us because people didn't have email. It was just forwarded to. I might have had an email account, but they didn't even seem to know it. So I have like stacks of emails that are printed uh, from sent to me via snail mail in order to read, and they're really sweet. And it was mostly like teenage girls or like some college age girls. Sometimes like a little flirtatious and sometimes not. Sometimes just like you were very different. You were very unique, and you were an individual, and you didn't try to fit in, and that made me feel better about myself, which was nice. And then in real life, like people who hated weirdos, which it turns out is a lot of people, like really didn't like me. So I would like walk down the street and people just be like, "You're that loser from Road Rules. You suck. Go take a shower." You know, I'm like, what? You remember and you're like mad at me about just showing up and not being normal. That was enough to get a lot of people to hate you. The people who I remember most often, like not only were nice to me after seeing me do the stuff I did on TV, but actually like were touched by me was like a lot of people of color and a lot of queer people. Like I remember meeting a trans man in Maine in like 2000 when being trans was like not, it's still, of course, something that will really get you bigotry today. But back in the year 2000, it was a whole other world where like they only told me that they were a man after like a couple of hours of conversation. They presented as masculine, but like didn't talk about it, and like had a girlfriend, but like didn't talk about it. And they like cried and hugged me and told me that for whatever reason they could tell that I was wrestling with stuff about myself and wanting to be myself while also being aware that I wasn't going to be accepted by your average person in a way that like really resonated with them. And they projected a bunch of stuff onto me, which is totally fine. I think one of the things about Pedro's legacy is he appealed to people who related with him directly, who are going through a similar experience. And he also related to people who wanted to be allies to people whom were suffering against bigotry and were like underdogs in general. But he was so specific in who he was that I don't know how much people projected onto him. Whereas I was like, because it was Road Rules and they didn't get into who we were as much as they did in the real world. And also, I just didn't have like a thing about me that was used to like label me as like, I was just the weird guy basically on my season of the show. There's everything else was somewhat mysterious. So people would project all sorts of stuff on me whenever they felt like an outcast. I was like their character, and I was absolutely proud of that. Like you're going to be in a show like that, and you have the choice between like making people who already fit in feel like they're reaffirmed in their normalcy and reaffirmed in their supremacy of being culturally dominant, or making the underdogs feel like they have a place too and that they have a character who represents them. No contest on who I'd rather be there for. So that meant a lot to me.
Well, I was going to ask, was it a worthwhile experience for you? You know, you said you went in thinking, okay, this is a way for me to become famous, but doing minimal amount of work. But it sounds like what you got out of it was very different from what you expected.
Yeah, so what I got out of being on Road Rules is pretty complicated, I think, and most people who were on it now 20, 25 years ago, talked to some other folks who've been on it recently, like Susie Meister was on the Australian season. She and I caught up a few years ago, but it was like for her, Tara McDaniel, who was on my season, we've talked about it too, a few other people here and there. But in general, it's both like embarrassing because like I think I helped ruin television and maybe society because at the time, as we talked about, MTV had like weird, fun shows left and right. And then after Road Rules, then it like started to just be, and Real World started to be more the less spirited, less unique voiced reality TV until it just eventually became ridiculousness, which I think is just people getting hit in the crotch and falling down over and over again. So like we were sort of the decline of MTV. I remember when I was at the MTV Music Awards and met Puck, I also met Liam Lynch, who created this show called Syphil and Ollie, which was like a sock puppet uh, music variety show. And I was like, your show's so much better than my show. I hope my show gets canceled and your show like goes on forever. I think his show got canceled like immediately after that, and Road Rules went on for another like 9 years, and it's still going on as the challenge. So, I think I made things. I was a part of making things worse, though I tried to be the part of MTV I liked on a show that was a part of the new MTV that I did not like, I guess you could say. So I feel bad about that, but live and learn. I'd probably do things differently now. In terms of my own experience, I'm like so grateful that I got to do all those things and meet all those people. I'm embarrassed about the show in some ways because I was 20 and just made a lot of social mistakes and mistakes in general. But I looked great. I think I looked awfully handsome, and it's fun for me to show people like, remember this? Or like my kids now, I show them like, can you believe that's me? And they're like, you look like a young, attractive YouTuber. I'm like, I had a time when I was that guy, and that's fun for me. I'm glad that that awkward, confused version of me will like live on, and hopefully in some way inspire people to know that they don't have to fit the mold. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be an alpha male. They don't have to be normal, and they can still be on TV and be happy. Um, so for that part, I'm proud and embarrassed and like selfishly just grateful that I got to do it at all because it was really an amazing time.
And it sounds like the medical experience on the show helped inspire the work that you're doing now.
Yeah, that's right. I think that when I applied for road rules, I had gotten bad grades in high school. I wasn't popular. Like the one thing I thought I could do well was be disinhibited and unedited and strange. Like I made weird movies with my friends. I was in a band called Johnny Holmes and the Friggin' Speed Bumps. Before that, we were in a band called Meatbag that was like terrible punk, I guess, joke punk. So I was like, I'm willing to humiliate myself in ways other people won't. So that's my special skill. I better use it. Then I was on the episode of Road Rules where we were in emergency department. I'm like, not only do I have this ability to like show up and be disinhibited, I also have the ability to show up in a crisis, take a breath, and like really try to help other people. And there was a particular aspect of the mission in the emergency department where I had to pull on a man's legs who had been crushed between two cars. And apparently, the structure of his legs, the muscle and the bone and all the blood vessels that are supposed to be able to be mapped out in a way where the blood can flow all collapsed. So his blood was not flowing to his muscles, and they were gonna have to cut off his legs because they were gonna get gangrene. The ortho guy was like, okay, pull on these legs. And the guy was huge. Those huge legs, like as big as me. He's like, pull on this leg as hard as you can, and I'm gonna wrap it. And that should give it some structure, hopefully, if I like compress the wrapping in the right way, that the blood will flow and we won't have to cut off his leg. Then after that, pull on the other leg and just pull as hard as you've ever pulled on anything. Because if you do it badly, this guy's going to lose his legs. So I'm like, okay. So you can watch it's on the YouTube video, I think, somewhere. I mean, pulling on these legs. And then at the end, they were like, good news. He's going to keep one leg. And I was like, hooray. Like, couldn't I have saved his other leg if I pulled harder? They're like, no, you pulled as hard as you could. Just the way it goes sometimes. He got one leg. If you weren't there pulling on his leg, and if it was just me pulling on his leg and wrapping it at the same time, he would have lost both his legs for sure. So that made me feel like I really made the world better. And that's definitely why I'm willing to work in an emergency department now, where I see death and injury and abuse and horrors every night. And I'm incredibly grateful that I get to be there to try to make the worst night of somebody's life hopefully a little bit better by just caring about them, listening to them, and using whatever I've learned in school and at work to try to be helpful. So yeah, it's I learned from Road Rules that I'm not only good at making an ass of myself, but I'm sometimes actually good at helping people by putting myself out there.
Wow, that is incredible. And I got to say, like in terms of the impact of changing television, being a part of television changing in one direction, and also being inspired to do this work that saves people's lives. I think the impact, if you look at your cumulative impact on the world and on culture, I think that you've probably more than made up for modifying your role in modifying MTV programming in the mid '90s.
So yeah, I don't know. I also feel badly that they never wanted me back on the challenge. They called me once, and I was like, "Yay!" And then they called me back, and they're like, "We changed our mind. We're gonna get the cute European guy. I think his name was Stefan or something, and he was awfully cute. So I can't blame him. You got to go where the cute is." And my hair was falling out at that time. I think they saw pictures. Well, no thanks. So yeah. Hopefully I've done good. I'm gonna keep trying to do good while I still can, and hopefully, you never know what'll happen next. They may make some sort of new MTV, an MTV3 that I can be on and like make up for all my errors by coming back and being on TV again. I was actually a part of this monster wrestling group that ended up on MTV2 as well, called Kaiju Big Battle. I forgot to even tell you that. I wasn't actually on the MTV2 version of that, but I was wrestling with them before that even happened. The amount of almost famous moments I've had are downright absurd when I think about all of them.
I remember Kaiju Big Battle when James and I were in Boston. I think it was going on there. Like it was a
Yeah,
local thing in Boston at that time.
that's right. They're now more New York based, but they're still going. I think I mean they started. I was in the first year of them when I was right off Road Rules. I was 20, I think. So it's like 27 years they've been at it.
Wow. Well, you
Yeah.
said, that you went on and your goal there and now is, let's see what happens. Let's do some good where we can. I mean, that seems like a good way to live your life, whether you're on camera or not.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. Likewise.
Well, Jonathan, thanks so much for chatting with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, me too. It's always good to see you. Hopefully, it won't be another. I think the last time I saw you was like 8, 9 years ago. So hopefully, it won't be another 8, 9 years again this time. It's always great to see you.
Yay.